I'm Mahendra Kutare. I'm going to talk about mainly how in the security space with the number of tools which are getting constantly getting increased because of increase in attack vectors leads to increase in the data, which leads to essentially looking at this problem from actual ICP perspective from a increase the volume. So from a user perspective, what does this mean? So that's the talk about essentially how do we make this increase in tools, increase in data, which leads to more investigations for the users, more actionable. So currently the number of tools which are in this space and the companies are spending millions of dollars to deploy the detection tools which generate low quality actionable insights and leads to majority of them going to humans for investigations and essentially fundamentally has shifted the paradigm in security. So this talk is about how do we approach that, how do we build AI first product to solve this problem. So before I go forward, a little bit about myself. Okay, very briefly in the past, I've worked in observability space, I've worked in security space, I've also worked in data distributed systems, machine learning at Mesosphere, at self-driving car industry, autonomous trucking and transportation. So the key theme across most of my work has been distributed systems, ML, AI, infrastructure, applying it to different domains, including security. And when I was working in the security space some time back, and then I moved into different spaces, the problem of security has actually gone worse. And that's what is motivating me to attack this problem and build this product. So before we go forward, let's talk about what is the reality. And actually, just quickly walk through the agenda. The current state of affairs, what's the reality, what's the shift happening in this space, and what are the challenges in building this product, and what is our approach, which is Deeptrail's approach to this. And hopefully that gives you an idea of like what are the challenges and how to approach building similar products in your space. But one thing which I wanted to highlight here is that the problem we are attacking is from the security space, but it's fundamentally how to build an AI first product from any product perspective. So what is the reality? The reality essentially, before we go into the reality, we have to understand who are our heroes, who are the personas of this problem. So first of all, if you think about from the organization perspective, there are 3 personas, but we are focusing on one of them in this particular talk. And the personas are security engineers and analysts. That's first, they're actually the end users of the product. Then there are essentially champions, which are head of securities, and then there are buyers, which are security, chief security officers and such. The majority of the tools are built for security engineers and analysts, even though the buyers are other personas. So what is the reality of that persona, which is security engineer and analyst, and what are the problems which they are facing right now? So this is a very broad stroke map of what has been the traditional security tools, and in the modern world, what has changed, and a new wave of tools and technologies which are coming. So typically, as new attack vectors come into the security space, you essentially start seeing more detection tools to identify what is going on in this system. And if you look at firewalls or endpoints or network, these are where most of the previous generation endpoint companies like CrowdStrike, Palo Altos of the world have been created. And then the modern infrastructure, when it came out, which is public clouds, SaaS applications, identity, the Oktas of the world, AWS of the world came by, right? The gist of this is that every time a new attack vector comes in, every time a new tool gets into for the system, you start seeing more work for security engineers, analysts to do based on the findings from this tool. So key thing to remember is that security engineers are constantly not just sort of drinking from a faucet, but from a fire hose because of the number of tools which are getting added to their system. Furthermore, they have to query more data sources because each of these tools come with some of their own data sources. So traditionally, there's been Splunk. Some of the tools have their own data lakes, whether it's Palo Altos or others. And then in the modern world, you will see cloud Trails, Elastic, Snowflake, Databricks, and some of these logs going in there. We haven't even touched to the new post-LLM world where there will be vector databases, vision multimodal databases where they may have to do some investigations. So the point here is that security engineers as a persona are continuously doing more investigations. They're querying more data sources, and some of these data sources may be centralized, some may be distributed. So the gist is the number of investigations and the tasks are increasing, and furthermore, as a security persona, as a security engineer, you have to communicate with different teams. So you don't have access to, for example, GitHub or platforms where somebody may have changed something because of a QA environment. Somebody may have changed something because a salesperson wants to do something on S3 buckets and all of that. So this hero of ours, essentially, is inundated with so much work that they can only do in a large organization 50% of the work assigned to them. So they are literally fried and tapped out at the number of tools and investigations we are doing. Now, if you think about what are the tools for them to help right now, this is the kind of current state of the world, where they're essentially using Jira tickets to actually start creating the work items for them, investigating from there, and then communicating through Slacks and Teams. And this is, for most people, is an ancient world, especially if you're coming from the data and AI world, if you think from a persona and a user who's using these tools, right? So at some point of time, these guys are like, I can't take it much. This is enough for me. And that's why you will see a lot of problems in security where there are not enough security engineers, there are not enough people trained in the security, because this is tedious work. And then you will have breaches, which essentially will lead to a fire hose of activities within an organization. So that's the world which many of these users are living in. And so what is the fundamental thing which essentially are the problems in this space? Just to recap what we talked about, essentially from the user perspective, there are not enough tools for investigations. From the experience perspective, you are laboriously working on repetitive work, continuously looking at Jira tickets, Slack messages to try to finish this work. And they don't have enough opportunities to grow because they're not doing impactful work. This is not something which anybody enjoys doing, essentially, right? From organization perspective, we are leading into higher risk into the data breaches, higher cost of operating teams because it's a manual work, and eventually the talent essentially associated with it. So this leads to the final and one of the most important thing which you should take out from this talk is this is a vicious cycle which has been created in security, that more attack vectors happens, more tools get added, which essentially means more number of work, more amount of work which is for the engineers to do, whether it's a pre-breach or a post-breach. And this cycle is what we are trying to break with the product which we are trying to build in this space, essentially. So before we talk about what customers have given us the feedback and what kind of product we are building, I want to just connect this cycle and what is happening here, right? What is happening is that people initially thought about security as a tools problem. Every time you have a attack vector, you add a tool, but it has fundamentally shifted into a human investigation problem. So security is no longer a tools problem, but it's actually a human investigation problem where bodies are put on this because most of these findings which these tools generate are actually not actionable. 90% of them goes and become Jira tickets, essentially. So from talking to the customers, these are the few insights which we got, or sample of the insight which we got, which is everybody thinks this is a huge problem, and there's no debating on that. Is this a big problem? Even Scott, which was standing here, was talking about, I have this experience before, right? What is the problem is that they don't want to change their workflows, essentially, with existing tools. They also want the tools which are essentially helping them come to the point of pre-breach investigations, not the automation which happens once you have identified what is going wrong with the system. So that's the first phase of user insights as talking to the customers. The second is essentially, for most of these people, they didn't had a good experience working on any kind of ML system, leave alone AI systems. So there is a lack of trust when you are talking to users about there's going to be AI system which will do all the magic for you, right? How do you build that trust is very key decision point in building this experience. And also, how do you build this intuitively that every time you make a choice through the AI system, it is more a white box or guided approach to them rather than a black box approach to that. Third, and essentially, this is the fundamental why we're building what we're building, is that they don't want to add more tools unless it solves their problem. Most of the tools have fall short and actually helping with their work. They actually add more work for them. So to break this vicious cycle, which I was talking about, the fundamental thing which has to happen is that these tools have to start doing the work for them rather creating work for them. That's the fundamental promise which we want to build this product on. So yes, this is the stage where the current state of affairs is, like, do something, help me, and do the work for me rather than adding work for me, right? And if you think about what they're doing right now, these people, also important thing to understand is that security engineers are not data engineers like you. Security engineers are not AI engineers like you. So for them to fundamentally build a groundbreaking tool for themselves is not what they are signed up for. This is not their wheelhouse, essentially, right? So as a data engineers, if you have security teams, you should talk to them to understand what's going on in their world and see how you can help them, because many of these people are struggling, essentially, right? And most people end up buying tools rather than building tools, and essentially, which adds more work. So that's the stage where we are, right? So what are the challenges in building this product, which essentially solves the security investigation problem? Some of it which we have already touched before. First of all, they want an experience which essentially is not an enterprise product, but a consumer-like experience in an enterprise product, which is, if you have ever heard of a security product being talked about in an enterprise world, I would call it as a bluff, because there doesn't exist anything, right? Because most people have horrible enterprise experience in the products, and the people who are coming in the security world, think about them at current stage, they are the users of TikToks and social media, and now you're giving them this shitty enterprise product to use. So there is a reason why these people don't stick to many of these products and hate the experience there, right? They also want to build the trust with the system, as I was describing, and how do you build that trust is very critical part, and I'll talk about how we are doing that approach. Then one of the critical things from the design and architecture perspective, which is related to the data part which we are talking about here, is security investigations are different than security compliance, and typically most of the data products which are in the security space combine all of this. And to give an example, 90% of investigations need less than 30 days of data. But security compliance requires 1 year worth of data. And now if you're putting Splunk, you are trying to bundle all of these use cases together, right? And so that is one of the critical insights of this, is that how do you build these new architectures where you don't have to always have to buy a Splunk and be able to do that. Large organizations can run in a centralized way, but most modern organizations don't go and buy Splunk. They don't go and buy Palo Alto. They don't go and buy CrowdStrike. They are dealing with different kind of stacks, right? So they are essentially doing with more cheaper storage, which is querying across distributed data sources. They also have budgets, which is not in millions, but in close to million. So they want to both have the teams as well as the products within that budget. So they're trying to figure out how to navigate that, not like a Fortune 500 companies, but by how they can build this new data architectures where there are different use cases for investigations, different use cases for detections, there are different use cases for compliance, and rather than putting all it in Splunk. And Splunk is expensive. I don't know if anybody has ever used it. It's one of the most stickiest product, but it's also not something which most people will ever rave about. I'm sure there are people who have used Splunk before. And that's not to dig on the product, but there are different use cases for different products, right? So it's about goddamn time that we try to solve this problem in a completely different way. and what that would look like. So to solve that problem, you have to understand all this context which I talked about and get those insights of like how to approach this problem from an AI first perspective. So that's where introducing Deeptrail, right? First and foremost thing is we don't want to create work for you, we want to do work for you. And how do we do that? We are introducing generative AI agent frameworks and the language models to actually do the investigations. And the way we do that is we essentially plan your investigations and use language models to plan those investigations and create those investigation plans, and then agent frameworks to execute those plans. Now, again, I talked about this approach and just briefly touched upon the UI part. Essentially, the language models are learning how security engineer would do an investigation and creating those plans, and think about those as decision trees, essentially, which are getting generated. And at each stage of the decision tree, there is a state which they can make a decision to go different parts of the, or traverse different part of the decision tree. And agent learn the tool's behavior and execute those plans. So essentially, building this new architecture using this new technology has been will fundamentally, in my belief, and why we are doing this is to fundamentally change the approach of, we are not trying to assist you, we are not trying to create playbooks or reports for you what to do, we are actually want to do the work for you. And that's the heavy lift which security engineers cannot do by themselves. We need an infrastructure and a way in which they can continuously deploy new use cases on this. So before Deeptrail, let's take an example of password spray attack. So this happens if an organization has been attacked where some attacker finds out your organization's first employees by looking at their LinkedIn and social media accounts, and they figure out this is the first name dot last name at company.com, and they figure out somehow using your social media different passwords which they can attack and try to get into internal systems as well as SaaS systems. So currently, if you look at this, there are like 10 steps of investigation as a human who gets this JSON from Okta from Threat Intel, and that gets created as a ticket, and then they are going through this 10 steps process, right? And each of the steps, they are looking at different tools, sometimes Elastic, Splunk, or Snowflake, depending on what you have, sometimes Okta, sometimes Stitch, sometimes Abuse IPDB, sometimes Slack, and other tools, and performing these actions, which are queries most of the times, or API calls. So for example, for this particular attack, you want to see where the attacker is attacking you from, what's the geolocation and IP of that. And then you want to look at, has this IP and user attacked, has happened in the past in our organization, and what kind of resolution we did before. That means that you're querying Elastic or some Splunk or Snowflake or such systems. Then you have to figure out what activities this IP and user is doing currently or has done in the past, because alert may have been triggered after the fact, right? So that is another set of querying which you are doing. And then you are looking at, how do I identify this is a unique device and user so that the fingerprint is this, of the previous sessions, and these sessions are same or different, so that is it my employee which is doing it, or is it actually an attacker which is doing it? Then you have to figure out, is this IP a bad IP or malicious IP, looking at external databases like Abuse IPDB. Then you communicate, last but not the least, with the actual employee, asking them, are you trying to log in this many times, or is this actually an attacker, right? And they may say yes, or they may say no. And so then you have to figure out, okay, are other employees in my organization are getting the similar things, so attack surface is increasing. And then what's the impact of this in my organization? Are there other SaaS applications? So think about one of the biggest attack which happened recently was actually Uber attack, which got attacked through their Slack application. Somebody figured out how to log in through, even after they had MFA enabled in their, for their employees. It was called, it's generally in the security world, it's called MFA fatigue. If you keep pushing MFA to people, eventually somebody will say, yes, allow it. And that's how they get into that, right? And then with Okta, they got attacked because some of their third-party customer apps, essentially customer support apps, got hacked. And through that, attackers got into their system. And with Okta, they in this customer apps, essentially, most of the customers who were logging in there and giving their information got attacked as cascade effect. So 1Password, think about Cloudflare, all of these companies, accounts were available there for the attackers to do and exploit. Luckily, Cloudflare and 1Password has better security than Okta, which is surprising given Okta is a security company. So this is actually really happening in the current world. Atlassian got attacked by Envoy, which if you go to any startup, you will have like a login system when you go inside the organization to give your name and login before they let you in. The attackers are attacking Envoy kind of a system because they know that employees are logging through this, visitors are logging through this. So there are various attack vectors which are more modern now, especially through SaaS application, right? So for each of this, you have to go and do, this is one sample. There are much more complex investigations which these people are doing. And the gist of this is that they have to connect with different tools, different databases, and different activities and logs in different places, right? So this is where, if coming back to the initial theme of the talk is like, how can we do less and reduce this sprawl of data and also make it actionable? Fundamentally, to solve this problem, do the work, you have to have a system which should be able to auto-connect with all of these tools and take some actions. That's why the language models and agent frameworks actually fits into this space really, really well. So what happens after we have deployed this technology, right? We will essentially do most of the work. We don't claim to do all the work for you, but we still need the human in the loop where they will review and approve the work product essentially done by us. They will still update and steer the steps which we have executed, and they will provide additional data for us to understand more investigation paths along the way. What we are doing is that as soon as the alert or IOCs or other triggers happen, we start autonomously investigating this. We generate, the way this works is that as soon as the alert or triggers get fired, IOCs get fired, we go and look at whether we need even to start an investigation in this space. First of all, that's a decision point. Once we identify it needs to be an investigation, we look at multiple decision plans of which decision plan we want to actually pick and go and execute. And that decision plan is essentially code executable, and which essentially, once we have that code executable at each stage, investigation plan stage, at code executable stage, think about this as an intermediate representation and actual code between those two stages, and each of that stages we are doing validation of whether this is a valid plan, why we have chose this plan, there is a scoring system behind it, and the code, is this the right code? We are generating Python code to connect with different tools, making different queries. So all of that is what we are doing, which essentially from our system, all the users would be doing. So we are literally collecting all the things for you before you can even start looking at your Jira ticket or wherever you want us to put that, right? So coming back, that's the heavy lifting we do. And most people, when I describe this, they are at this stage, especially the security engineers, are like, I can't believe that this will be my life going forward. But this is going to be reality very much soon. What I see is that we will have a series of language models and agents, which essentially I call as investigation LLMs, which will do different parts of this task for them. And they will be able to steer them, to be able to guide them to do most of the tasks which they are doing, and we'll be able to review them. So what the business outcomes of all of this for most of the organization is very clearly reducing the security operations cost, most importantly, reducing the time to investigate and de-risking breaches, because humans can only do so much work constantly with the fire hose which we are talking about, and ultimately increasing the productivity of security engineers and analysts to be able to do more impactful work. So that's what we're building as a Deeptrail, and hopefully that gives you a perspective of how to build some of these AI-first products in whatever space you are looking at. Thank you.